Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Application Committee. My name is Councillor Gerard Hargreaves and I'm one of the Vice Chairs of the committee, and I'll be chairing our Planning Committee this evening, so welcome. I'd also like to welcome those who are watching on the live stream outside of the chamber. I'd like to introduce the people on the platform here this evening so you know who everybody is. To my right, I have my fellow councillors who will be, along with myself, will be hearing the applications and deciding on the application at the end of the presentations. To my left, I have council officers who will be presenting and guiding us through the applications this evening. We have planning application officers, planning lawyers, and Mr. Jerome is clerking the meeting for us this evening. So that's how we stand, and that's how we will conduct the meeting tonight. We do have a number of applications with speakers, so we will hear those applications first, and then we will move on to the applications without speakers. So just so you've got the running order, this is how we will take it. We will start with Pembroke Square, then move to Linden Gardens, then Ladbroke Road, Colville Terrace, Ledbury Mews, and then we move on to the applications without speakers, Cornwall Gardens, Old Brompton Road, Park Walk, Lotts Road, Kelfield Gardens, Brompton Road, and Old Church Street. So that will be our order for this evening. So before we start the actual applications, I have some formal business that I have to go through from our agenda. So item number 1, do we have any apologies for absence? No apologies for absence, thank you. Committee, do we have any declarations of interest? Councillor Rome.
Nothing pecuniary to declare. I just want to highlight that I know the speaker in the case of Ledbury Mews, but I haven't spoken to the person in quite a few months now, and the case definitely hasn't been discussed, so I do feel I can objectively look at this case.
I'm sure that's okay. Yes. Thank you very much, so that's okay. Any other declarations? Thank you very much. I've got the minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of June 2023 for approval. The committee, was anybody at that meeting and happy for me to approve those minutes? Agreed? Thank you very much. So we now move on to the applications. As I said, we will start with Pembroke Square. Who's going to present that to us this evening? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So the application is in accordance with the development description on the front sheet. And just turning to the slides, this building is listed, so there's 2 applications before you this evening for planning permission and listed building consent. As you can see from the front, is this property here indicated by the red dot. It's actually a facsimile of what was there before the war. So it was rebuilt in 1949 with the front exactly the same as existing, but the rear somewhat different. So just turning to the rear there, you can see it's kind of a 20th century appearance to it. So in terms of significance, the focus is on the front, and then some interest still in the plan form and other alterations. This is the front elevation of the property, very successful in the street scene. And this is the rear elevation. It's important to see here that there's already an infill extension, so the plans will show you in a second how they will be replaced, and an additional story is proposed to that painted brick closet wing you can see to the right. Turning to the plans, you can see some of the internal alterations, highlighted the demolition works in red and the new works in blue. And I think the most helpful is the elevation drawings. Apologies. This is the front elevation, and we can see that there's a reinstating a cornice at the very top and changing a window. But on the rear elevation, this is kind of the biggest change, where we have the existing infill extension and that painted brick closet wing with the proposed alterations here. So you can see the replacement windows here, this additional story, which is very important and has raised objections, and this new infill with the new design. Again, some sections through, showing the new works, and there's also air conditioning proposed on the roof to serve the bedrooms on the top floors. That concludes my presentation, Chairman. Thank you. And apologies, thank you, Lorna. Just draw members' attention to the addendum report, because we have sought to amend condition 10 on both applications, which relates to the fireplace and how that is secured to be installed before the development is finished and complete. Thank you.
We do have some speakers for this application this evening, so I'd now like to call upon Tim Bolton, who's going to object to the application. Tim, you have 3 minutes. Off you go, please.
Thank you. Good evening all. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of Tim Honour, who's at number 25 Pembroke Square, and wish to raise a few concerns which are very much meant to be constructive criticism and helpful. The first concern is the significant disruption that it will cause for, in our view, very little benefit for the owners. The significant number of beams proposed mean that the disruption will be worse again, in our view, for little benefit. That may also harm the character of the home by creating large open spaces in the home, perhaps not in the nature of the properties, but we appreciate, again, that's entirely subjective and only our view. Others may have different views. Turning to the proposals, the air conditioning unit, in our view, again, is an unnecessary luxury in our current climate, recent weather excluded, especially in buildings that have basements. In fact, in many listed buildings, any outdoor air conditioning units are banned by different planning authorities. So there are concerns over noise and vibration, and further, it's difficult to see how the unit will be adequately maintained once installed, so some assurance on that would be useful. The unit, combined with the proposal to enlarge the windows, will clearly cause the deterioration in the EPC, and surely the opposite of policy given the climate emergency. It may provide some comfort if the planning conditions ensured suitable installation on all of these issues. The extension to the rear appears to be taller and deeper than others already in place. The additional building will reduce the light into 25 Pembroke Square on the landing, as well as limiting the outlook and giving a sense of enclosure. Whilst I'm sure that the statutory light rules are fully complied with, it will clearly reduce the light to a steep set of stairs, which seems dangerous and unnecessary. The width of the proposed structure, the additional structure at the back, means that the additional space created, particularly after insulation required on a modern build, will be very small, and additionally would rob the new conservatory that's proposed as part of the development of a significant amount of direct sunlight, and so defeating much of the purpose of the conservatory. If shade in the conservatory was required, then a set of blinds is so much easier, and so much so with air conditioning. And again, we accept that these are our views, and some of this is very subjective, but we would hope that you would take these into account when considering your decision. Thank you.
Thank you for sticking to the time. Thank you. I'd now like to call upon Enrico Galliani, who's going to speak for the applicant.
Good evening all. There are various points that I would like to cover, starting from also the description of the development. The reconstruction after the Second World War bombing, we thought it was very successful to the front, but the rear, it was done with some economy and which is very much understandable at the time. They used machine-made bricks, they used metal windows which have been replaced in the past with not appropriate windows. Therefore, when you look at this application, you look at a considerable enhancement to the building and to the terrace as a whole. This application went through a series of consultation with the planners. We put in first in February a pre-application with the advice that we received from a heritage consultant. Then we moved to a follow-up application and then to the full application. And at each stage, we listened very carefully to what the planners told us. They told us things about the internal layout, which was part of the objection just received, but also, and most importantly, on the closer wing extension. We started with a two-story extension. We demonstrated that the light for a two-story extension weren't to be significantly reduced, and following the advice, we reduced it to one story, and even further so was demonstrated that the light levels are totally retained. There are some not habitable rooms at the back on the first floor, therefore the sense of enclosure and light should be assessed with this in mind. I also would like to point out that the air conditioner unit on the roof is behind the parapet wall, therefore completely invisible. The reconstruction of the Second World War allowed for a flat roof, which allows us to conceal very well the unit there. And the noise impact assessment fully demonstrated that the background noise levels are not to be affected by the machinery that will be located there very discreetly. It is definitely a consideration for the applicant, everything that has been said with regard to energy consumption and the use of a conditioner. And this will be limited to specific time of the years and not a usual occurrence. I also would like to add that because of intervention, not only we are not harming the amenities of neighboring properties, but I think we do really give a positive contribution to the terrace. The closet wing extension will have the well-proportioned, well-detailed windows that we should expect every year of a listed building, so much so the main windows, and in particular the infill extension that at the moment is quite a poor piece of construction. Let me reiterate this point. We have a building which was rebuilt quite well at the front and not so much at the back, and has been subject to a serious alteration which at the moment leave it quite out of character with everything. And with the planners, I think we came up with a very valid proposal for how to enhance the building and the context.
Thank you very much indeed. So over to the committee to ask any questions of the speakers, please. Who would like to go first? Yes, Councillor Lane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one question, if I may, for the applicant's agent, Mr. Galliani. We have an objection from ARSA, the Local Residents Association, which says, amongst other things, that the air conditioning units would only comply with standards if put onto a low setting at night time. Is that something that the applicant would be willing to consider as a condition or not?
There is a further enhancement to the performance of the outdoor condensing unit, which will be to install an enclosure. We done in previous jobs. It wasn't suggested or required by the report, but if it were to be secured by a condition, we wouldn't have any problems with that. So definitely that will address the point. I also, apologies if I still have the opportunity to say so, but one of the things that we should consider that in the last few years, for very good reason, we understand how important it is to have a balance in the space in a house between living and working. One of the things that these works
Mr.
will
Galliani,
provide.
I'm going to ask you to restrict your answer to the question,
yes,
please.
apologies.
Do you want to say anything more on the air conditioning unit? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we now have a chance. Thank you very much for the speakers. We now have a chance to ask the officers any questions. Who would like to go first? Do we have any questions?
So I'd like to ask the officers, basically a follow-up from Councillor Will, if you would consider adding such a condition that at night the air conditioning levels, sound levels need to be lower. Would that be possible?
Yes, thank you very much. Through you, Chairman, we have condition 5 on the planning permission. Just draw your attention to that, which mean lots of words, but it basically means if you can hear it, it doesn't comply with that condition. So if at night that is audible, our environmental health team or our planning enforcement team would be able to take action and would be able to get that switched off, the air conditioning. So whether it's at night or in the day, it cannot be heard above the background noise level. So I think we're fully covered in that sense. If, as the agent mentioned, an enclosure is needed for them to achieve that, so we have a report that shows it can be achieved, but if they subsequently think, oh, we didn't need an enclosure because we want to have it on the highest setting, they can come back for planning permission and listed building consent, and we can consider that. But what's before us now is something that complies with a condition that safeguards the amenities of neighbours, which is paramount.
If I may just follow up on that point a bit further, I think it doesn't directly answer the question, because that still shifts the burden onto neighbours to have to hear it, to report it, to get officers out to the house. The applicants have said they're happy to put it on a low setting at night and to have that as a condition. So could that specifically be added to condition 5? I think both parties are happy with it, so is that possible?
I actually would advise against saying about the low setting, because it might be that in a particular time we would want it more than a low setting, or because it needed, you know, there's just, it almost adds an element of ambiguity about it. Whereas this condition is so sort of hard in its wording, and we've tested it many times before, and is definitely enforceable. But we could add an informative that says the committee notes that the setting must be low, and that is the requirement, and that's what the noise report states. So, you know, as a reminder that that is what's been approved, because that is what's been approved. And then if any, you know, it reminds the applicant of their obligation, if that makes sense.
Yes, that would seem to make sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the officers?
I just have a technical comment, and none of us are air conditioning experts here, but I'm not aware that by attempting to control an air conditioning unit's output, you can actually impact and moderate the actual amount of work that the motor is doing. So what low means is not necessarily going to be translated into how much noise a condenser is making. So my own caution on this, unless there's something very technically secure about it, which I don't think there is that we would be adding ambiguity, and also we would then have a series of people who might say, well, I want that condition on my one, I want that condition on my one. But I don't think it's achievable, because, as I said, what does low mean? Does it mean a particular temperature that you're going to set it at inside a room? But you know, the condenser works at different levels of effort depending on what the outside temperature is. So I would, you know, for long term, I've remained sort of content that the switch off, if you can hear it, is the strongest condition, and it's generally been accepted in all cases that I know about.
So we're not going to do anything with a condition. If we do it as an informative, does that bring us obligations for future, as Councillor Macrovis says?
I don't think so, because Councillor Lane has raised a fair concern that, you know, that is essential. So it's almost reminding the applicant everything you've said in your noise SPD, or your noise report, sorry, and committed to show compliance with the noise SPD. You just need to make sure you do it, and it's on the decision notice. So I think that's a good solution, and then that condition remains robust and enforceable.
Okay, so we'll leave it as an informative on that one if the committee's minded to do that. Thank you. Okay, any other questions for the officers? So in that case, then, we need to move to making a decision. Would anybody like to comment on the application before we go to making a decision? Okay. Yeah, so we have two decisions in front of us this evening. The first decision is recommended that the committee grant planning permission with the conditions listed in section 8 of this report. Would those members in favour of that recommendation please raise their hands?
Chair, sorry, before we vote, sorry, there was this amended condition that Fiona referred to in the addendum, but with regards to the informative, and we were talking about it being on a low setting, can we just confirm what, if we are going to add an informative, because I thought that's what we were going to do.
We are going to include the
yes, but can we just clarify, what does a low setting mean? What are we going to actually say?
I was going to say something along the lines of the committee reminds the application of their obligations and commitments in the noise report submitted, and potentially lift a quote from it if relevant, just so that it's clear, but something that's linked directly to the application.
Does that work from the legals? Yes. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So let's go to that recommendation. Would those members of the committee in favour please raise their hands? That is agreed. So we then need to go to the second recommendation, which is on page... is recommended that the committee grant listed building consent with the conditions listed in section 8 of this report. All those in favour of that, please raise their hands. Thank you. That also is granted. Thank you very much. So we now move on to the second application for Linden Gardens. Who is going to present that? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So just again, turning to the addendum report, we received 4 additional objections to the application, raising concerns about noise, the large sliding doors, and that there's there's limited natural light between the buildings. Some of these objections also raised concerns that they didn't receive a notification letter, but officers have investigated this in detail and we have sent them, but it appears they may have been delayed, but we still received 3 objections within the consultation period. We also did a site and press notice, so that's why it's before you this evening. Councillor Gardner has also written to members on the committee panel, you would have seen, requesting a condition about noise mitigation measures, and so just wanted to draw your attention to that. Turning to the slides, here are some photographs of the rear of the building. The crux of this application is that they're kind of reconfiguring and relaying out an existing existing kind of hostel accommodation and creating, or HMO accommodation and creating studio flats. Moving to the next slide, you can see that also involves some extensions to the building, and this is a helpful comparison of the rear elevation where you can see those additions. Now, importantly, I'll just flick back again. If you look at the very lower ground floor, there's a door and a window as existing, and as proposed, there's these sliding doors, one of which 4-panel, 2-panel, and 4-panel, and that's what a number of the objections relate to. There's some existing courtyard elevations showing the arrangement there, and proposed, showing that infill extension proposed. And this is a helpful visual that shows in blue those additions to the building. Overall, the changes to the building officers see as very positive in terms of the impact on the people living there. So as currently arranged, there's lots of very, very small units. So if you look in paragraph 6.2 of the officer report, it explains exactly the layout and arrangement as existing and compares it to the proposed. And I think this is really important because what we've had to do as officers and what members will be looking at this evening is balancing out, you know, is it better, the new arrangement, which we are happy that it is. But just drawing your attention that unit G4 to the rear of the lower ground floor is one of the ones we've talked about that is slightly smaller than existing, but when compared to the, slightly smaller than we would normally expect, it's still on balance better overall within the building, and again with some of the other units at lower ground floor level. So officers are recommending approval and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
So again, we have speakers for this, so I'd like to ask Sebastian Millett, please, for the objectors. You have 3 minutes, sir. Do you want to put your microphone on? There you go. And if you could speak into the microphone, then we all can hear it.
Seeing those large sliding doors just puts the fear of God into me. My children are sleeping 3.5 meters away from those doors on the other side of those little backyards. I've lived in that building for 55 years, and I know very, very well how acoustic that well is, where those backyards are. When my children were born and bringing them up, we called that backyard, our one, the Whispering Garden, because we knew how much other neighbours would hear their noise when they were playing there. And none of the other, I don't really understand why it has to be those sliding doors. All the other basements have, like we do, just a normal sash window with a door to go out there, and those doors, when they open, the noise will be absolutely horrendous. It's a studio flat. That means it's television, not just bedroom, you know, kitchen noise, kitchen smells. There's an awful lot of marijuana smells coming from that building, and have been for a very long time now. I don't know if that's just the nature of small studio flats and so on, but we live and experience everything that goes on in that building ourselves. And God help us if they are used for short lets and Airbnb, that would just be even worse, and people moving in and out late at night and so on. And we're surrounded by Airbnbs in Linden Gardens. I don't understand how any kind of sound baffling could work, which Councillor Joanna Gardiner has mentioned. I also, my second concern is that there's very little natural light coming down into those basement wells, and I don't know how carefully calculated it's been that this extension of the first floor, the rear first floor, coming further out will affect the natural light for us. And I should just say that, as has been mentioned, I received a letter on August the 25th for this planning. The letter was dated 20th of April. I received it on August the 25th. I was supposed to reply by the 19th of May. I have been allowed to give my comments, but I know that enormous numbers of my neighbours have not received that letter. Only one flat in my building received it. And as I understand it, there are more comments now because I've been alerting everybody in a dramatic last-minute rush to tell people. I'm here representing everybody in my building 79, which is 6 flats, and also number 85 basement, his child's room is also going to be next to the other one of those big sliding windows. So I'm begging you, just have a normal sash window with a door like every other basement. It's just, it won't affect anybody, including the people asking for the sliding doors. You just have a normal door and a sash window, please. That's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I now call upon Kate Matthews or Max Skipworth-Burton to speak for the applicants, please.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honoured to speak before you today as a representative of Kipton View, the owners of 65 to 69 Linden Gardens. Our journey with this property began in December 2019 when we acquired it. We've undergone 2 pre-applications and 1 application that we ultimately withdrew due to the Council's request for a Clwyd submission. We've since submitted the Clwyd, which has been approved. Now we're here before you today to discuss our second application. Allow me to provide you with some context about our company, Lefroy. We specialise in investment and development with a particular focus in RBKC. Our expertise lies in the realm of HMO blocks and studio blocks across the borough. Over time, we've successfully developed more than 200 refurbished units, which are all under AST tenancies. But we're not just a developer, we're committed to being a positive force in the borough and the wider community. We're currently in the process of becoming a B Corporation, emphasising environmental, social and governance factors. As part of our community involvement, we proudly serve as corporate patron of K&C Foundation, a charitable enterprise that embodies our values of giving back to the community. Now, looking into the proposals for this evening, our plans have been meticulously crafted and refined through a series of applications with a dedicated team by our side. We initially collaborated with JLL, Heritage and Planning, but due to unforeseen circumstances, they disbanded their team. However, we've continued our journey with Kate Matthews from First Plan, who's here today, another reputable firm. So we have had a very strong advice and guidance throughout from both our team, but also the responses from the RBKC planning officers that have been involved. I understand that there are concerns raised by the objector here today regarding noise from the revised lower ground floor. We have been aware of these concerns and have discussed them extensively within our team from the various objections, as well as the proposed condition by Councillor Joanna Gardiner. Our proposals look to reduce the number of available units at the rear of the building across the lower ground and ground floors from 11 flats to 6, which is a considerable drop. This reduction in the number of units will inevitably lead to less activity in the kitchens, and so less clattering of pans, the smell of cooking as the objector mentioned, and a lower number of tenants overall. All of these changes are geared towards minimizing noise levels and addressing the concerns raised. Another objection that the objector here today raised regarding Airbnb, I can confirm that these are not intended to be flats for Airbnb use, and we're well aware of the
Your
council...
time is up. Can I ask you to conclude, please?
Sorry. So we are aware of that. The parking was another objection that has been raised. There's a section 106 that we've started.
Okay.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Committee, Councillor Mackover. I can't turn mine off. You just keep projecting.
Yeah, you're a very professional operator of these things. What policies do you put in place that might give some assurance to the objectives?
Well, on both of them, both AST, on the AST tenancy, this is not working. On the AST tenancy, people aren't allowed to sublet. So if they put their property up on Airbnb without confirmation from the landlord, we would end up serving notice on them. And that's the same with the drug use policy. I mean, if we've been informed of people that have been taking drugs and it's clear that we're able to provide proof, we would switch off. We would be able to serve notice on this.
Yes. Okay. So thank you. I did hear the responses to that. There's one more question to the applicant. We've heard that there seems to be quite a low wall between the rear of your proposed units and the neighbours on the other side of the wall, and it's relatively close. Have you considered, or is there a discussion to be had between you and your close neighbours about increasing the height of that wall or providing some sort of sound baffling? I haven't been there, so I don't know how it could work, but I'm just asking if there's a way that some neighbours could feel some sort of reassurance on that.
We would be very happy to raise the garden wall between our two properties. We've discussed potential sound abatement, but it will be an impossible task if it's just outdoors. I mean, as much as you can put sound deadening material potentially on the wall, I don't think this will impact the airborne sound.
Actually, the question wasn't you, sir. I have to stick to the regulation. Yeah. Okay. Any more questions?
Just a question to the applicant, perhaps preempting what the objector was going to say. The large glass panel sliding doors, I mean, to my mind, they do seem somewhat incongruent with the rest of the buildings on the terrace, which have the more traditional types of doors and windows, sash windows. I think the buildings are Victorian, but I'm not 100% sure. In terms of the heritage of the area and the design of the doors, do you think that it's acceptable to have those large glass panels, and why didn't you consider going with something of a more traditional design? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kate Matthews, also registered to speak. So in terms of the heritage, these are timber-framed sliding doors, and they are at lower ground floor level. And I know that the discussions in the pre-application considered them acceptable because of the level that they're at. So they might not be acceptable higher up the building, but it was considered that at basement level they were in a discrete enough location. The reason why we've mainly gone for that is to provide as much light as possible into these basement units, because we're looking to achieve the highest quality of living accommodation for the residents. Obviously, it is a balancing act, but we are making a slight reduction in the number of units at upper ground floor level. We still have more glazing than currently there, but they are sliding doors rather than bifolding, so they wouldn't be 100% open. They'd be kind of halfway slid across.
Thank you very much.
Just to follow up on that, what is your, you said about more light, I appreciate that, but this issue of sound is obviously, these two, light and sound are competing here, aren't they? Would you consider sash and main door as the objectors have asked for? Would that make a fundamental difference to those flats?
No, I wouldn't consider that at this stage. I think we've gone through 2 pre-applications and a separate planning application that we withdrew. I think it's important for the design of the building for us and the quality of accommodation for future tenants.
We hear from the objector that it's only 3.5 meters between the bedroom of one flat with the sliding doors of this particular building. How have you taken that into consideration in this application? Was that not a problem for you?
I think that's a really good question, and I'll just quickly go back to the presentation to show you. It is really sort of tight and constrained around there, and the doors go on to very close to the neighbours. But importantly, there is an existing door serving those units. So you can see here at this lower ground floor level, there's a door and an opening. So we're looking at the sort of kind of existing openings that are there. And when we compare that to the proposed, it is larger, but not so large in terms of noise to raise any concerns, because the access and the openings, there are already some there. In terms of appearance, we're not concerned, again, because it's at the very lower ground floor. We still have a good degree of solid to void on the back there for a lower ground floor level. So that's why we've come to the conclusion in character and appearance terms and amenity terms, we're happy with it. But it's probably helpful for members to just see those photos again, because it's right, it is a constrained site, but there's lots of openings. The overall number of units is actually being reduced, and on balance we're happy with the arrangement proposed.
Thank you, Chairman. We heard from the applicant in relation to the height of the wall that they would be happy, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they would be happy to raise that height to just above head height. I understand from the objector it's just below head height. Is that something in legal terms that we can condition? Is that something you'd be comfortable conditioning?
Sorry to be difficult, I wouldn't really be comfortable with it because I don't know, that could have implications on the neighbours to the back in terms of light or sense of enclosure. Because it is so tight around there, you know, a fence up against their boundary could have other impacts. So it would satisfy noise, but light, outlook, sense of enclosure could be affected. So I think it would be a case of considering the openings that are there. Is that enlargement of the opening harmful? And going from there, that's the best way to consider it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, then we need to come to make a decision, and the recommendation is that we authorise the Director of Planning and Place to grant planning permission on the satisfactory completion of an undertaking or agree to secure the matter of Section 7 of this report and with the conditions listed in Section 9 of this report, or to refuse, and you see what is in paragraph 2. So, it's recommended the committee to authorise Director of Planning and Place. Will all those in favour of that please raise their hands? Thank you. Anybody against, please raise their hand. And there are no abstentions. So that is granted. Thank you very much. 15 Ladbroke Grove, who is going to present that?
Yeah, that's me again, Chairman. Thank you. Just one slide for you on this application to show you that a basement has been previously approved. The application before you this evening is for details of a condition attached to that relating to contamination, which the full wording is in your pack. Our contaminated land officers have reviewed the application in detail and are satisfied with the submission. There has been a refusal on this site to discharge the same condition before because the information kind of wasn't good enough for environmental health, so they recommended refusal. But they are now satisfied that we have the information we need to meet the reason for the condition, and so we've agreed with them and recommended approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. We do have speakers for this, so Fabio Ganza, who is going to speak in objecting to this proposal, to the application. Fabio, you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Fabio Ganza. I'm the owner and residence with my family of 17 Ladbroke Road, the adjoining terrace house. And the text that I'm reading has been agreed with Pierre Muretil of number 13, the adjoining owner on the other side of the applicant. Considering the mitigation measure and not addressing the contamination risk, we firmly object the application. This project has two specific characteristics for residential property. First, the property is adjoining a land that was used for over 30 years as an oil product depot with several underground tanks for a total capacity of more than 26,000 liters. At least one tank was in close proximity to the applicant garden. Documents produced for the works in that area describe very clearly the situation found and risk posed by the contaminated soil. Second, the project excavates soil to a depth of 8 meters before the relevant ground level, a depth hardly seen in a terrace house in the area. These two factors make the project having deserve a much more detailed approach to the mitigation of contamination risk. We and other neighbors have highlighted 3 main areas of concern that have not been properly addressed in the application and our officer report. Number 1, soil investigation reached only a depth of 3.5 meters, while the excavation will reach a depth of 8 meters below the relevant ground level. Why an analysis at deeper level has not been done? Given the depth of the installation of the adjoining property tanks, it is probable that one or more oil products leaks have found their way to the applicant land, so also below the made ground level, permeating the river terrace deposits normally present in London clay formation. There is a material risk that oil product and gas have remained trapped in the river terrace deposits below the applicant land, also at depths below the one tested. Number two, the application is lacking a proper description of the way the huge amount of potentially contaminated soil, more than 100 trucks, will be managed and moved out of the site. The officer report says the issue is addressed by the applicant. We would disagree. There is very little detail on it. Taking the construction traffic management plan as the reference, the soil removal process will pose enormous safety risk to the worker, neighbors, and pedestrians walking the street. Number three, the application does not address this council recommendation on monitoring, and I quote, "The officer at planning application stage indicated that given the nearby sources of ground gas, fuel, and chemical vapors adjacent to the site, gas monitoring would have been expected," unquote. But no monitoring is proposed in this application. Health and safety matters should be treated in a much more rigorous way, and this application should be rejected. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now have a number of speakers who are speaking for the application. Who is going to speak? How are you going? One person, or are you going to split it?
We'll share the time.
You've got 3 minutes together.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Off you go.
Good evening, Vice Chairman, councillors, officers, and everyone joining us here and online. My name is Victoria Savecka, the planning consultant on this project. I'm speaking on behalf of the applicant, Ms. Catherine Ochtering. Also here is our contamination consultant, Luke Wilkinson, and architect, Ronaldo
Can you just pop the
Rustico.
microphone nearer to your mouth?
So our architect, Ronaldo Rustico, who will answer any technical queries. Since this committee granted consent for the erection of the basement at my client's property in September 2022, we have been working with the council's officers, design team, and specialists to agree all condition details. Construction traffic management plan, site construction management plan, compliance with code of construction practice, and structural engineer details all have been improved to ensure construction works are safe and considerate to the neighbours and wider area. All our works will comply with government good practice guide, considered contractor scheme, construction design and management regulations, Part 2A Environmental Protection Act, and Health and Safety at Work Act. The only condition preventing the work commencing on site are the contamination identification and remediation before you today. This application is resubmission. We listened to the council's initial comments, discussed routes to address them as part of pre-application process with the council's environmental health officer, and agreed the remediation strategies proposed here. I will now pass on to our contamination consultant to summarize.
Hello, I'm Luke Wilkinson, Principal Geo-Environmental Engineer with over 10 years experience in contaminated land assessment and work for Soars Limited with 41 years of experience in contaminated land. I've carried out extensive work at 15 Ladbroke Road, including the death study and 2 sets of intrusive investigation with a total depth of 10 metres. The investigation confirmed the ground conditions and contamination risk, followed by the remediation strategy effectively dealing with the contamination risk. I've also reviewed the development at the former engineering works to confirm that our investigation and remediation is appropriate in this context. The ground conditions are 1 metre of made ground, followed by natural London clay formation comprised of clay. The rare earth deposits are not present on site and cannot be encountered below the London clay. Lead concentrations above the guideline values were recorded in the made ground. There was no other contamination. Lead contamination is typical of urban London setting, as backed up by the Environmental Agency Urban Soil Chemistry dataset. Elevated concentrations of lead are ubiquitous in urban settings and not necessarily related to the former engineering works. No contamination was identified within the London clay by visual, odour or chemical laboratory testing. The London clay is effectively impermeable and prevents movement of contamination laterally and vertically. The investigation confirmed a risk from lead with a low risk of dust migration during development. I produced a remediation strategy to deal with this contamination. The made ground and contamination will all be removed, providing betterment to the site. The strategy uses best practice specifically designed to reduce the risk to the site workers and neighbours. Dust generation will be limited by...
I'm going to have to bring you to a close. Can you please finish?
In conclusion, there are 1 metre of made ground with lead contamination. There are no other unacceptable risks. The remediation strategy is based on established industry best practice and allows safe removal of the contaminated soil.
Thank you very much.
Betterment for the site.
Thank you. Councillors, could I ask if you have any questions to the speakers, please? Any of the speakers? Okay. Any questions to the officers, please?
Just a minor clarification, if I may. If the committee were minded not to approve these conditions, what would be the status of the underlying planning application?
They would have to come back to, they could either appeal the condition or they would have to come back and discharge it again with additional information that you may want to identify as missing. So that's the two routes.
Could you then just briefly, obviously the soil contamination is a key issue here. Could you just clarify again why you are content with what's been done, please?
So the risk of contamination on this site is all off-site. So the actual risk on-site is far lesser, as our environmental health team have confirmed. The first submission we had, Environmental Health objected and recommended refusal, and the refusal reason said that the risk that existed wasn't minimised or managed sufficiently. So what they did was went away. There has been pre-app, and they've come back with a new strategy to again minimise and manage the risk, and Environmental Health are now satisfied and support the discharge of the condition. We're satisfied with that. They're kind of the technical experts, and we do take their lead from them as the local planning authority, and we have no evidence before us to come to a different conclusion. You know, the speaker's comments are absolutely relevant. The objections taken into account by Environmental Health and us, but it's difficult because two experts can often say different things when discharging it. But the reason for adding the condition, in our opinion, has been satisfied, which is why we're recommending approval at committee this evening.
Thank you very much. Any other questions before we go to a vote? Okay, so the recommendation for this is the committee approve the details of conditions 13 and 14 of the planning permission PP/22/03444. Would those in favour of that please raise their hands? Nobody against? So that is granted. Thank you very much. Can we now move to 1 Colville Terrace, please?
Thank you, Chairman. That's myself presenting this evening. Before I start my presentation, I again would draw members' attention to the addendum report. There is an additional informative added in relation to the use of the studio office remaining ancillary to the residential use of the sites. The application before members this evening seeks planning permission for the erection of a single-storey outbuilding to be located within the rear garden of 21 Colville Terrace. The application site can be seen identified on the aerial imaging in front of members. The application site is identified by this red arrow here. The proposed site plan can be seen on this slide. The outbuilding would be sited towards the rear boundary, built in accordance with the plans, and would be full width adjacent to the boundaries of number 20 and number 22 Colville Terrace. The proposed front elevation of the outbuilding can be seen on this slide. The outbuilding would be constructed of red cedar timber cladding, would include folding double glazed doors on the front elevation with some timber privacy screening. The final materials are secured for approval under a condition. And lastly, here are some site photos. So the outbuilding would be sited towards the rear with my cursor, if you can see this on the presentation before you here. And the image on the right-hand side shows the slightly lower boundary wall shared with the adjoining property, which is number 20. That concludes my presentation. The officer's recommendation is to grant planning permission in accordance with the conditions listed in the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We do have speakers for this application, so I'd like to call Anne Taylor to object to the application. There's a square black button. Yes, okay. You're there.
Right.
And you get quite close to it as well, please.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. You have
Hello.
3 minutes.
Can you hear me all right?
Perfect.
Thank you.
The need for peace and tranquility is more and more precious in these stressful times. And this application is for a commercial premises to be constructed in the very small, that picture doesn't do it justice, rear garden of a residential building within a conservation area, whose sole motive is profit. We ask that it's not given the go-ahead. From the front window of this garden office building, the occupants will be staring straight in at the ground floor bedroom windows of numbers 20, 21, and 22 Colwell Terrace. They will have benefit of a privacy screen. We cannot look in, but they can look out. Must we worry every time we open our curtains in the morning whether there is someone in the garden concealed behind a privacy screen, barely 5 meters away, who can see into our bedrooms? They can see us, but we can't see them. This is not sufficient reason to prevent this development. We ask for the following condition: that the front and side elevations shall have obscured glazing in addition or instead of the privacy screens. No one knows who will occupy or what the use of this place will be in the future. As this is described as an office, studio space, it could be used to launch a new business venture with all the attendant conference calls and business discussions in the back garden, or maybe a sound engineer. If you open the door to the back garden being used for business, it will be used for business. And then why not all the gardens along the whole of Colwell Terrace? The garden will become an extension of business space, destroying the garden amenity either side. If this isn't sufficient to prevent this development and also to mitigate noise and light pollution, we ask for following two conditions. The office shall be soundproofed in a most strong way, that as a business space, it should only be used during business hours, 9 a.m. to 5:30 at the latest, Monday to Friday, no weekends. Finally, the sedum green roof will fail. Sedum are sun-loving. This green roof is directly underneath a 6-meter-high north-facing wall. It will be almost permanently in shade. It's a token gesture towards preserving green space, which will shortly end up as an eyesore. We feel the planning advice report does not even begin to address our concerns, and we hope that the professionalism, knowledge, and integrity of this committee will refuse this application and protect not only the very small gardens in Colwell Terrace, but small gardens across the borough.
I'm going to ask you to bring it to a close now.
I'm finished. From this insidious and dangerous precedent that could be set.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask you now to switch your microphone off,
Yes.
please? Same button. Thank you. I now call upon James Senior, the applicant, to speak for 3 minutes, sir.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is James Senior. I'm the applicant for the proposal. I'd like to start off by saying it is not an office, it is not a commercial premise. It is no more than an outbuilding being proposed for the end of the garden. It is, my architect has called it an outbuilding and office studio. It's more likely to be a yoga studio or just additional space for the property. It's a 2-bedroom lower ground floor flat. And the additional outbuilding is part of the existing dwelling. There is no intention whatsoever, and this application does not cover it being in any form whatsoever commercial. It is not an office, it is not a commercial office of any type whatsoever. It is a modest outbuilding which we built against a very high 6-meter wall. It's been built into the shadow of the wall, which rarely gets any light. The outbuilding only projects about 80 centimetres above the existing very high garden walls to each side, which would show a small amount of red cedar panelling that would over time age and we feel would not be would be discreet within the garden. The green sedum roof, which has been proposed, has been chosen from previous applications as something which is very hardy. We would also be installing an integrated watering system to ensure its long life, its longevity. The privacy screen was designed to reduce any overlooking. It's not been created to spy on anybody or to look into anybody's garden. From the front to the doors are approximately 2 meters high. The privacy screen covers 50% of that. The garden itself, if people were to be out there, would be able to see into the rear gardens of any of the other properties at any time anyway. We do not feel that it will produce any more overlooking than if somebody was sitting in the garden as it is. Overall, we feel that this modest outbuilding would accord with RBKC's planning policy in the conservation area, and we would hope that the committee would consider it for approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Do you want to pop your microphone off, sir? Thank you. I now give the committee a chance to ask questions. Councillor McIver.
Thank you. Just a question to the applicant. Can you just tell me a little bit more about the privacy screen? Is it fixed to a window? You said it's half the height of the windows or doors, half the width. So it's half. So what is it? Does it slide? Is it attached to the building? I couldn't work out from the details what form it was.
It can slide and it is attached to the building. It is there to reduce overlooking. It is made of timber, sort of timber slats, which have narrow gaps between them. It should be able to be seen in the drawing.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Lane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 questions, if I may. One to the applicant first, and then one to the objectors. To the applicant, we've heard, just following on from Councillor McIver's question about the privacy screens, that it will essentially be one way. You will be able to see the objectors, but they won't be able to see you. Why wouldn't you consider obscured glaze that is not visible from either side?
If we were to do an obscure glaze at the back of the garden, which is against a very high wall, the amount of light which would be able to get into that room would make it extremely dark. That's why we've chosen the privacy screen, to be able to provide light, but also provide... We don't want to be looking into the neighbours, and we don't want them to be looking into us either.
Thank you. And then, if I may, Mr. Chairman, just a question to the objectors. You mentioned your concern that it would be used as office space, but surely in the sort of post-COVID work-from-home culture, people are entitled to have a home office and make conference calls and make profit. Of course, we're not a socialist society. People are allowed to do that, surely.
The pictures that you showed of our gardens are deceiving. This building is going to take up quite a big space. It will also project probably 1 metre plus above the walls. Sorry, what else did you ask me?
You mentioned in your objections that this was built essentially for profit and that the applicant might be making conference or business calls. My question was...
A developer bought this property at auction, and his only concern is to make as much profit as possible, whatever the outcome.
My question just finally, is that is not principally a planning concern, and
I apologise.
people are allowed to make profits? Thank you.
But may I just say something else? The
If it's related to the question.
The screens that he's talking about, which will block out light if they are obscured, they already face the wrong way to get hardly any light. So I don't understand what light obscure glazing would stop getting in there.
Okay. Thank you. More questions to the speakers? Thank you very much indeed, speakers. Any questions to the officers? Councillor Verboden.
A few comments, actually. The first question is such a room structure in the garden a common feature in the area? And second, Personally, I do think that these screens actually need to cover the entire area, but another comment that I saw in one of the objections that I didn't really see dealt with in the report was relating to workmen being able to look into the neighbors' bedrooms in the morning when they started work. Personally, that's something that would horrify me. Has that been taken into consideration so far as well in the report or in any of the conditions? Thank you.
If I take your first question in relation to any outbuildings within the local area, I'm not aware that we have permitted any outbuildings within the adjacent neighbouring properties. An assessment has been made within the officer's report that in relation to the character and appearance of the local area and the conservation area, it is acceptable to have an outbuilding suitably sized to the rear garden. But I'm not aware of any within Colville Terrace or this section of the terrace grouping. In relation to any impacts during the construction and any views in relation to any builders who may be constructing the outbuilding, that hasn't been specifically mentioned as part of the officer's report, however has, I believe, been picked up as part of the objections section. There may be construction workers who would be able to view over and above the boundary wall. However, that would be the same relationship in terms of any existing users of that garden space. There is a condition specifically relating to construction. However, that is for the code of construction to minimise any impact during construction, such as the noise and hours of operation. But I don't believe there would be a condition that we could attach in relation to any views or any outlook in relation to construction workers who may be building it.
Dorian.
Thank you, Chair. Is there anything in our policies regarding what the potential size of this kind of outbuilding would be? I mean, I do note it seems to take just over a third of the current garden space.
So in the development plan, there aren't specific policies which dictate the size of an outbuilding. It is an officer's judgment as to if the outbuilding would continue to preserve or enhance the conservation area, and also whether it would preserve the character and appearance of the property and the garden and have an acceptable impact of residential properties. There isn't a specific policy which says that an outbuilding can be a certain size within the development plan.
In principle, then, the application could be for the entire garden, for example, and there's nothing specifically in current policy that's restricting that.
There's not a specific dimension. However, if an outbuilding was to cover the entire site, then a different judgment may be made.
Okay.
Back over.
To officers, just want to return to the purpose and the viability of the privacy screen. I don't really see from the drawing how it would work and how exactly it would protect residents. I would be minded, if this was going ahead, for a condition that the details of the screen would come to officers so that they could confirm how it would operate. What are these slats? How does it move? It only seems to cover half of the area, but it needs to be thought about in terms of its relationship with the residents in the rest of the building. And the second thing is, I couldn't see a condition saying that the privacy screen should be so maintained, and I would have thought, given its significance, because the rest of the building is not part of the application site, that officers should first of all have the chance to approve how it's going to work and sort out the details of it, and secondly that it should be maintained there to safeguard privacy in perpetuity.
Thank you for your question. So in relation to a condition to safeguard the presence of that timber screen, we have got condition 2, which is compliance with the approved plans, and the timber screen is shown on the approved plans, so that would have to be included. In relation to whether the timber screen itself is necessary or whether we need to attach a further condition. All I would is remind members that the existing use remains as is. It is a residential use where they have use of that garden space. The boundary walls are relatively low, as you saw on my site photos. So the current situation could be that the applicant could stand in a similar position and be afforded similar views as they would when using that outbuilding.
Yeah, I was thinking about the answer. My point still stands, but it's up to anybody else if it is going forward to say, do we think this privacy screen, as drawn, is actually doing the job it's meant to do? It's when we see if it's bathrooms or other sorts of things with obscure glazing, which I'm not suggesting or asking for here, but that there are usually details which have to be approved. It's just this doesn't seem like, it seems like a slightly unusual design, and I'm not sure how it would going to work. It seems to slide and make half the place privacy protected and the other half not privacy protected, so it's doing half a job, and therefore you can always look out of another bit of the window. I just wasn't convinced it was providing the privacy that it looks on the plan as though it might be doing.
Question is, can we put a suitable condition into that it comes back to officers for their approval of the screen? Can we do that to start with?
You could attach a condition. I would just ask members to think about what they would like to see as part of that condition. At the moment, the materials in front of us show that the screening would be located on this section, and it would be slidable so that you could slide it towards the left of this image and then over the door. Would you require a condition for that to be fixed shut so that it's not slidable, or just some further clarification on what you would like the condition to achieve?
It's a bit of a debate to have, but if you're asking me, it's very difficult for me to say, sitting in this room, how that screen is effective in providing the privacy that it's set up to do, and I would look, if my ask would be that if it's saying it's protecting residents from harmful overlooking, obviously there has to be some light and the place has to be used as well. I'd want officers to use their experience to come up with something that's workable. That just seems to me to be something that just slides around and doesn't necessarily do anything.
So, Councillor Mackover, are you wishing to propose that?
I think that's all I could do to help on this with what we've heard from objectors. They're asking questions about the privacy screen. I am as well. Not sure how it's going to work. Would be better if officers could make sure that it has its desired effect and is usable. But other councillors might have a view as well.
Well, you're proposing that. Is there something substantial there to go in as a condition?
So we've got condition 4 at the moment, which requires the submission of the materials. We could add an additional requirement for the details of the timber screening, including how it operates.
Yes. Would somebody like to second that? Councillor Lane. Okay. So proposed by Councillor Mackover, seconded by Councillor Lane. And unless there are any other questions, Councillor Lane.
A quick question to Ms Culver from me, Mr Chairman. We've heard about the sedum green roof and the objectors saying it will die due to lack of shade. Do officers agree, and is there alternative flora that would do better in the shade?
So the details of the green roof is being required by condition 6. That is in relation to sustainable urban drainage systems. If members felt it necessary, we could attach a further condition for details and maintenance of the green roof. However, I don't know whether it would be necessary in terms of the scale of the development. However, they would need to provide additional details in relation to condition 6 anyway.
If I may just follow up, my only concern is that often these green roofs are sort of seen as a bit of a tick box, and someone will put them in and then they'll die after 6 months and won't be thought about anymore. So if it's not too burdensome, perhaps we could condition that, but I'll leave it at your discretion.
Otherwise, we could also include an informative to remind the applicants to have careful consideration over the type of planting specified within the green roofing, if that would satisfy.
That would be very welcome. Thank you, Ms. Colver.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we now need to move to a vote on this, and the... no, I'm afraid not. I'm sorry. We have to follow the rules exactly, or else people can appeal and we can lose the whole process. So I'm really sorry, but I'm going to have to say no. So the proposal is recommended to the committee grant planning permission with the conditions listed in section 8, plus that additional condition that we talked about.
And the informative.
And the informative, yes. So all those in favour, please raise your hands. Those against? 3-2, that is granted. Thank you very much. We now move on to application 9 Ledbury Mews. Who is going to present that?
That's me. Thank you again, Chairman. So, planning permission is sought at this site to demolish the upper floors of the building. And I'll just turn to the drawings here. So this is an aerial image that shows the building in context, and I'm just hovering my cursor over the part of the building proposed to be demolished. It's that first floor level and the roof. You can see here outlined in red. And this is the existing building, a photograph up close. And this is an internal photograph of the building. So the replacement structure is identical to what's there as existing. So no change in design or appearance, and we have conditions suggested to secure that. Importantly, the application has been accompanied by a structural engineer's report which explains about the condition of the building because apparently there are cracking and distorted walls. We have consulted with our building control team to make sure that that was robust, and they have agreed with the recommendations within that, and due to the bowing nature of the walls and distortion, have agreed that demolition was the only option. Subject to the conditions, officers are recommending approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. And we do have a speaker in objection to this. Sam Dodson, you have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good evening, councillors. A key point of I speak on behalf of the Pembridge Association. A key point of our objection was to do with that structural soundness. The engineer's report, as provided, doesn't, as other parts of the application do, imply an immediate need for demolition or an immediate risk of collapse. We were disappointed that the applicant didn't seek a dangerous structure notice from building control, as we would have expected prior to the application being made. The structural engineer's report also claims that there'll be no disruption to the party wall, but this has already happened. Since buying the property, a number of drills have been driven into the living space of 5 Brunswick Flats, as you can see from the attachment to the objection from that property. Whilst it's not within your care to decide party wall matters, I understand it is within your care to decide on the basis of impact on neighbouring properties and disruption to this party wall. We've not been assured by the structural engineer's report that that is true. There's no specific assurance. The use of appropriate building materials and the reuse of existing brick and timbers wherever possible is something which we should always strive for, especially in the conservation area. In principle, we don't object to this building being brought back into use, but our duty as a conservation association is the protection of the character of the conservation area, and we're unable to do so given the limited amount of information supplied in this application. Under 6.5 of the officer's report, it stated that little detail has been given of how the existing brick and woodwork would be used. I understand the conditions go some way to rectifying this, but they do not go as far as we would like. In 6.8 of the officer's report, it stated that no changes will be made to neighbouring properties, but the application claims that this property was last occupied by residents on the 1st of April this year. As neighbours, we attest that's not true. with long-standing neighbours stating that this has been out of residential use for a number of years. You can see from the photo it's not been lived in this year. Use of the roof terrace at the back, which is a pitched roof with gullies either side. Use of that as a roof terrace has already begun, with construction workers and surveyors taking breaks there, and that would be a change which would require consideration here in terms of the noise and light pollution that would be put up, that would affect on the properties at Brunswick Flats. There is allowing this application to go through as is with such key conditions, specifically on the reuse of materials and the choice of new materials if required. But to be doing that through conditions with such vagaries in this application is not something we want to see happen. The principle of reuse of materials, the appropriate use of ad hoc roof terrace, the safety of the building and the urgency or necessity of these works, the safety of the adjoining walls during the works, the construction traffic, which hasn't been mentioned at all in this application but affects a Mews which has suffered a great deal from poorly managed construction over the last 2 years, and the disturbance to neighbours during the works themselves has not been discussed. The applicant asks councillors, neighbours and the Pembridge Association to trust them on this. They give us no assurances whatsoever. And through a lack of consultation, unclear drawings, damage already done to the party wall during exploratory works, and the use of an ad hoc roof terrace, we feel that the applicant has demonstrated that we cannot trust them. Until a time when these ambiguities are clear in the body of the application, we would ask that no permission is granted. We don't feel it's sufficient to discharge conditions in this case because the property will have already been demolished, and obviously we will have no choice at that point. We'd like to see all of that laid out before us before the application is approved. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you very much. Would anybody like to ask any questions of the speaker? Any questions for the officers, please? Councillor Bowden.
Can I just check with officers why a traffic management report was not required as part of the conditions of this application? Because it is a Mews, so it's a small area. Thank you.
So CTMPs are normally only attached to basement applications or major applications unless there's a specific reason to do so. So for a development of this scale going back on the same footprint, the ground floor is going to remain. We don't think that that's necessary to make the development acceptable, but we have attached the Code of Construction Practice, where it has a more holistic approach to protecting amenity. So that's why officers have made that recommendation.
Thank you. And sorry, another question actually. In one of the objection letters, the fire escape route was mentioned. And I'm terribly sorry, I didn't see anything on that in the report either. Has that been considered, and is there any feedback that you have on that point?
It's, I'll just go back to the plan quickly. This is actually sort of one part of a bigger site that the applicant owns. So this is just this section here identified in red that is being demolished and rebuilt, so that it's not going to affect I think the fire access that's being referred to is on a different part of the site. So there's no concerns relating to that. There would still obviously be building control that would oversee the works and ultimately sign it off. But from a planning point of view, given it's a householder application, we have no objections.
And sorry, one final point to come back on the first question. Would you consider a CTMP? Because in the end, we are demolishing half of the building. It is in a small Mews, so that there might be more being demolished than expected in such a small area. Because it's a small area, I would potentially consider that. Would that be possible, do you think?
Yes, through you, Chairman, I think members could add that if they thought it was necessary, and given the tight Mews location.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be reasonable in my point of view.
Thank you very much. We'll come back to that, Councillor Burton, at the end and see if you want to propose that as an amendment. Councillor Lane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one question for me, and it also relates to a written objection from Mrs. Fleming-Brown. I know it's mentioned in the objection that the higher floor is being proposed to the Mews elevation out of character. I do note in officers' response to objections, you say no additional story is being proposed, but is any additional height being proposed? I must admit the drawings were quite a lot of them, and I couldn't really tell. So is any additional height being proposed? And if so, would you consider that out of character with the area?
No additional height whatsoever. It's just an exact replica of what's there. So we've made no assessment on whether it would be acceptable or not. There's just no additional height.
If I may just follow up on that, in your opinion, why do you think so many of the objections believe there's additional height or an additional story? Has something been misinterpreted? Or?
I don't want to assume, but I have. It's that when you look at this building in context on the street, I should have got a wider view for you, but you can see that there are lower buildings and this is the highest one. So when you look at the elevation, in simple terms, it looks like it is higher, but it's not. We've checked that. The existing and proposed drawings are identical in height, and I actually spoke to the agent directly just to clarify, why exactly you're doing this, and it's purely for structural reasons, I was told.
Very grateful. Thank you very much.
Could I just ask about what the objector raised about the roof terrace issue? Could you just enlighten us on that, please?
I think it's on the other part of the site within the blue section, so within the applicant's ownership, but outside the application site. So this is the rebuilding the same, and no roof terrace is proposed as part of this application, but I can't confirm that something won't come forward if it's, the residents probably know better than me what they can see happening on the site, and if something is happening without permission, we can investigate it for them, but this application doesn't propose a roof terrace.
And there's no access from this to an existing roof terrace?
Not as shown, so the existing relationship is just being duplicated on as part of this application, so there's no new openings or exits out onto it. It's just exactly the same walls and openings.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I would like to propose that.
No, I assume the standard wording of our condition. Yeah.
We now then need to go to a vote, please. And it's recommended that the committee grant planning permission with the conditions listed in section 8 of this report, plus the additional condition we've just talked about there. Would all those in favour please raise their hands? Anybody against? That is granted. Thank you very much indeed. So we now move on to the applications without speakers. The first one is Flat 2 Cornwall Gardens. So I'm just going to give you 2 minutes to find that in your papers. Could officers just give us a steer on that, please?
Thank you, Councillor. The application seeks listed building consent for the works described on the front sheet. There are no speakers, as you're aware, and therefore a presentation hasn't been prepared. The recommendation is to grant consent subject to the conditions as shown in section 8 of the report.
Thank you very much. We will give councillors a chance to ask questions.
Of course, sorry, I should say, I'm obviously happy to answer any questions and
thank you,
any points of clarifications.
Councillor Mackover.
Yes, just a straightforward question. It seems from this that a number of original features will be repaired and reintroduced, so presumably the conservation team is welcoming some of these overall proposals.
Indeed, sir, it's seen as an uplift. Lots of original features being reintroduced, and it's not just the preservation of the asset, it's the uplift of the asset, going back to plan form and, as I said, introducing original features.
Any other questions for the officers? Okay, then we need then to move to a vote on this. It is recommended that the committee grant listed building consent with the conditions listed in section 8 of this report. All those in favour, please raise their hands. Anybody against? Any abstentions? That is granted. Thank you. Can we now move on to 41 Old Brompton Road?
Thank you, Chairman.
Just going to give it off, because we're not having a presentation, just to make sure they've got that in front of them. So next in the pack, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Planning application retrospective of the installation of an air conditioning unit and a refrigeration unit. I think there is a slide on this, actually, just to show you. Thank you. For illustrative purposes, again, there are no speakers. Accordingly, no presentation has been prepared. Recommendation is to grant subject to the suite of conditions as shown in section 8. And again, happy to answer any questions or points of clarification.
Thank you. Any questions, the officers, on this application? Okay, then we need to move then to vote. It is recommended that the committee grant planning permission with the conditions listed in section 8 of this report. All those in favour, please raise their hand. Anybody against? That's carried. Thank you. 59 Park Walk. Again, just give it 2 seconds to find our papers. Next to the back. Who's going to just introduce this? Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. I draw your attention to the addendum. Paragraph 1 has been changed. An amendment has been made to correct the name, correctly identify the order as a Town and Country Planning General Permitted Development England Order 2015 as amended. Paragraph 3.1, an amendment has been made to make it clear that Parkwall School is a Grade 2 listed building. Paragraph 7.3, the words "or loss of privacy" have been added to the end of the paragraph. Paragraph 7.8 is amended as follows. In February 2022, subsequent to 2 previous approvals at number 75 and 57 Park Walk, a High Court case, CAB Housing Limited versus the Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, provided clarity on the interpretation of the wording "external appearance of the dwelling house" in part AA2, brackets 3, brackets A of the General Permitted Development Order. The High Court looked at 3 appeal decisions where prior approval was refused by a local planning authority and their decisions were upheld by a planning inspector. The High Court ruled that the external appearance of the dwelling house is not limited to its principal elevation or any side elevation fronting the highway or to the design and architectural features of those elements. And the control of the external appearance of the dwelling house is not limited to impact on the subject property itself, but also impact on neighbouring premises and the locality. Paragraph 7.9, the words "and the wider street scene" have been inserted after the word "terrace" on the 5th line to marry up with the first sentence in the paragraph. Section 8.3, response 2, reference to windows on the rear 3rd floor has been removed as the information was incorrect. Section 8.3, responses 12 and 13, the wording has been changed to reflect the impact within the existing vernacular. Section 8.4, response 1, the comment has been altered to simplify and reflect the comment is noted and agreed with. Again, it seeks permission for the works as described on the front sheet of your application pack. Again, no application, as there are no speakers, no presentation.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee to the officers? Councillor Durham.
Thank you. If committee were to refuse this, not sure how to refer to it if it's not a planning application, what would the applicant then be entitled to do?
They could appeal. They can apply for planning permission separately. It's certainly within your gift to refuse it if you feel that it doesn't accord with. I think what the officer was saying in their report, just to clarify, is that there are already 2 examples within the street, and therefore that now forms part of the character, and therefore they feel it's acceptable in the round. So, but nonetheless, just clarify, it is within your gift to refuse if you disagree.
So to all intents and purposes, we can consider it as being a planning application as any other, and almost set aside the fact that there is this permitted development.
Pretty much. I mean, usually with PD stuff or prior approval stuff, it's a yes or no, but this does give you more scope. So.
Any other questions from the officer? Okay, then we need to move to a vote on this. It is recommended that the committee grant the application in accordance with Class AA and Part 1, Schedule 2 of the Town Planning Act, plus the amendments that we've had outlined by the officer. Those in favour, please raise their hand. Those against, please raise their hand. That is granted. We now move to 77 Lots Road, which is on a separate report. Who is going to present this? Alice, thank you.
That's myself, Chairman. I will just draw members' attention to the addendum report. There is an amendment to section 7.1 which relates to the unilateral undertaking and the financial obligations. We are seeking to admit the financial contribution for the air quality contribution, which in the officer's report is stated to be £1,500 and 50 pence. I would also ask members to consider a change to Condition 10. Condition 10 relates to contaminated land and is for a preliminary risk assessment report. I am seeking a change to that condition so that it reads the same as Condition 11, which is no development shall commence except for demolition above ground level. The rest of the condition would remain the same. This application is presented to members this evening as it is a council-owned application and therefore has to be determined at a Planning Applications Committee. There are no registered speakers. The officer's recommendation is per the report to grant planning permission subject to the completion of a unilateral undertaking, and I am happy to answer any questions or clarifications. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions to the officer on this application? Okay, then we need to go to a vote. It is recommended that the committee authorise the Director of Planning and Place to do what is outlined in 1 and outlined in 2 with the amendments. Addendum, yes, yeah.
Correct. The amendment set out in the addendum and the additional change to Condition 10, which is the preliminary risk assessment.
Okay, so those in favour of that, please raise their hand. Those against, please. That is granted.
Thank you.
Thank you. We now move to 33 Kelfield Gardens. Give 10 members a chance to find that in the papers. Back in the North Pack. First item, yeah, thank you. I've got my guide on my left, so thank you. Who's going to just introduce this?
That's myself.
Thank you.
Again, I would draw members' attention to the North addendum. We, as officers, confirm that this application is retrospective and therefore there's no requirement for Condition 1, which is the time limit condition, as the air conditioning units are already in place. We are also seeking to add an additional condition, which is Condition 4. This relates to the timber and metal covering, which is shown on the photographs on the slide before members this evening. And that condition is just to state that it doesn't benefit from planning permission as part of this application. And there is also an additional informative, which is informative number 5, which outlines that it may require planning permission and therefore they're advised to contact the planning team. That concludes. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions on this application for officers? Nope. So we then move to a vote. It is recommended that the committee grant planning permission with the conditions listed in section 8 of this report. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Anybody against? No. That is granted. Thank you. Okay, so we now go to 270 Brompton Road, which is at the end of your, back to your south pack. Okay, who's going to introduce this?
Thank you, Councillor. I respectfully request this application be considered in tandem because it's is basically an alternative to alterations to a shop front. Draw your attention to the addendums in the pack. They relate to both applications. The words revolving door and replaced with timber shop front entrance have been deleted from paragraph 6.6 and paragraph 6.8. Paragraph 6.14, 15 and 16 have been amended as follows. Development would support outdoor life by activating the frontage and providing passive surveillance over the streetscape. There will be sufficient space under the awning in its extended position to allow for free flow of pedestrians on the footway. There would also be no evident risk to the passage of motor vehicles and emergency vehicles on the carriageway. However, there would be less than 3 metres on the footway between the proposed planters and the curb and the existing traffic light pole on the footway, which would further reduce the effective footpath width. The resultant space on the footway would be contrary to section 9.1 in the Transport and Streets SPD. Therefore, a condition is recommended to omit planning permission for the outdoor planters and the tables and chairs that would reduce this footway width. With the recommended condition discussed in paragraph 6.15, the development would support outdoor life and maintain passage of pedestrians in compliance with local plan policies CR13 and CR4. Paragraph 6.8 has been amended in the report. Considerable importance and weight has been attached to the special attention has been paid to the desirability of preserving or enhancing the character and appearance of the nearby conservation area under section 72 and the need for special regards to be paid to the desirability of preserving nearby listed buildings or its setting under section 66 of the Planning Listed Building and Conservation Area Act 1990 as amended. Recommended condition 2 has been amended to include the words subject to condition 3. The development shall not be carried out except in complete accordance with the drawings shown on plans 2302 PA EL11 and 2302 DESN01. Informative 2 now includes the words subject to condition 2 and 3. Planning permission is hereby granted. And there are no further updates and there are no objections who are registered to speak. Permission is sought for, as I say, you've got 2 alternatives there. Permission is sought for the development as proposed on your front sheet and subject to the conditions contained in section 8 of the report.
Thank you. Councillor McIver.
Thank you very much. I had read also those details in the updates. I have a question about 6.15, where I won't read the whole thing again. My question is it just the outdoor planters and tables that would reduce the footway width that will be recommended for omission, or is it all of them? As in, is it just the part of the pavement where there is the blockage because of the signal post?
Yes, sorry, I think this is slightly confusing. All that we're asking for in the applications, or all the applicant is asking for, is the alterations to the shop front. The chairs in and of themselves, that would be subject to another planning application, which may or may not come forward.
Does that answer your question?
I'm still unclear.
Yeah.
The wording is that you're recommending a commission, we're recommending a condition which omits a planning permission for something that would reduce the width of the footway. I can't quite see we're recommending something that that we're not asking for.
I'm finding that confusing as well.
Sorry, I think, having read it very quickly, I think what we're saying in paragraph 6.15 is that the tables and chairs that are shown on the drawings would result in less than 3 metres on the footway, which is unacceptable and contrary to the SPD, and therefore, in this instance, we are not approving them because they would be unacceptable. So it's within our gift to omit some things rather than just refuse an application on that basis. So I think what we're trying to clarify is there would be less than 3 metres because of the planters and tables and chairs, so that on that basis we are omitting them from the scope of the application before you this evening. I think that's
Thank
what
you.
you're
The
asking.
whole width of the tables and chairs.
That's correct,
Okay, thank
yes. Can I just take the opportunity as well while I'm talking, just to clarify the difference between the two applications because they are very similar. So application 4086 has a revolving door front entrance, and 4050 has a double door front entrance, and they are simply the two differences. They've obviously got two options as two separate applications, so they are principally the main differences between the two.
Okay, any other questions on this application? In that case, then we need to go to a vote. It is recommended that committee grant planning permission with the conditions listed in section 8.
Yeah, if you just want to confirm the reference that you're considering, it's separately because they're two separate applications, just for the avoidance of doubt.
So
Yeah.
we are now about to vote on application PP/23/04050. Yes? And the recommendation is to grant planning permission conditions listed in section 8 of the report. Those in favour, please raise their hands. That is granted. Nobody objecting. So, guide me on this next bit then.
And then it's that reference under there, which is the second application.
So we now move to the second application, which is 04086. And is anybody just going to say anything on this, or do we go straight to a vote?
Yeah, thank you. It's just to point out the difference there, as the boss has said, it's the revolving door principally is the difference there. So.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on that? Then in that case, then we go straight to a vote on, remember again, 04086. It is recommended the committee grant planning permission with the conditions listed in section 8 of this report. Those in favour, raise their hands. Anybody against? No, that is granted. Thank you. We now move to 26 Old Church Street. I want to just find your notes for that, which is the end of that pack. Who is going to take us through this? Just introduce it. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Yes, seeks permission for the development as described on the front sheet. Again, as there are no speakers, no presentation has been prepared. Recommendation is to grant subject to conditions, and I think a legal agreement with that one. Let me check. Obviously happy to answer any questions or points of clarification. Draw your attention to the addendum. Reference to policy CK1 has been substituted for policy CK2 in paragraph 6.2 and 6.5 of the committee report. The words street scene and wider conservation area are added after the words host property on the fourth line of paragraph 6.13 of the committee report. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions to the officers? In that case, then, we move to a vote. Recommended the committee authorise the Director of Planning and Place grant permission on the satisfactory completion of an undertaking of agreement to secure the matters in section 7 of this report and with the conditions listed in section 9 of this report. 2, to refuse planning for if an undertaking or agreement of section 7 has not been satisfactorily completed by the 24th of October 2023. So, with the addendum, those in favour of that application, please raise their hand. That is granted. Anybody against? That is granted. Thank you. That concludes our applications this evening. I'd like to thank all the officers for their reports and my fellow councillors for being here. Thank you very much. The meeting is now closed.